Now we're going to cross over to our Ocean for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Mark. It is indeed time for Global Insight. With just over a month to go before South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol takes office, his people are losing no time in engaging with officials of the country's staunchest ally, the United States. Members of Yoon's Conservative People Power Party have already left for Washington. The delegation, made up of diplomatic and economic experts, will reach out to key people in the Biden administration to consult with them on policy and deliver a letter for the US president from his soon-to-be counterpart in Seoul. We discuss what will be on the agenda, as well as the future of the bilateral relationship. For this, we connect with Tobias Harris, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress, joining us from Washington, and Mason Ritchie, Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University's Foreign Studies here in Seoul. Very warm welcome to you both. And Mr. Harris, thank you so much for joining us from Washington, D.C. It's a Sunday evening for you, so we're all the more grateful. Well, my first question is, now South Korea's President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol, his party members, they're already in Washington. The delegation's being led by Park Jin. And, well, first of all, what purpose will this trip serve, and how do you expect the Biden administration to get along with this incoming Yoon government?
Great. Well, thank you for having me. You know, you have a Biden administration that made very clear during the President Biden made clear during the campaign that cooperation with allies was going to be a top priority for his foreign policy. We have seen him put that into action as president. We've also seen him really prioritize the Indo-Pacific region in his foreign policy, notwithstanding, a major crisis in Europe. I mean, you've still seen a lot of focus from senior officials on Asia and making sure that Asian partners are involved in that crisis. And so I think there's a lot of interest from the Biden administration in ensuring that there's a smooth transition to the Yoon administration. You know, I think, of course, we saw last year when President Moon was in Washington that you had a joint statement that was very ambitious. I think you're going to want the Biden administration is going to very much want to find opportunities to build on that joint statement and to find continuing cooperation with the new Korean administration. I mean, I think they're very interested in opportunities that the new administration presents, given what President-elect Yoon emphasized on the campaign and his focus on the United States. And so I think this is really more about opportunities rather than damage control, let's say.
And Professor Ritchie, well, what do we know about Mr. Park Jin, who is leading this delegation, and what does the composition of this group really tell us about the kind of relationship that they're trying to build with people in Washington?
Sure. So Representative Park Jin is a known quantity. He's highly respected. He has tons of connections in Washington. He's a rock-solid U.S. ROC alliance supporter. He's experienced both in the Blue House and also as the former chairman of the National Assembly Foreign Affairs Committee. He also, in addition to security, has expertise in trade as well. He's also known as being tough on North Korea, like many in his party are, although I think he has a diplomatic bent as well. And I think all of those things serve him well in terms of taking the lead on this delegation. The other people going with him include Cho Tae-yong, who also is an experienced National Assembly lawmaker, former Ministry of Foreign Affairs Vice Foreign Minister. He's also very well known in Washington, D.C. I think where things get interesting on this delegation is when you look at some of the accompanying members. Representative Cho and Park Jin are sort of obvious candidates for this. But along with them went Professor Chung Jae-ho from Seoul National University, who's a China expert, and Park Chol-hee, also from Seoul National University, who's a Japan expert. I think those are really going to be names and reflect something that's going to be sort of music to Washington's ears. I think bringing a China expert along indicates that the Yoon administration incoming is going to be interested in working with Washington more on China than perhaps was the case with the Moon administration. It also sends a message to China as well, not so subtle diplomatic message, especially since it doesn't look like there's going to be a similar delegation going to Beijing, one notes. And also Washington's very interested in trilateral U.S.-ROC-Japan relations, and so sending a Japan expert, I think, also sends a very positive message to Washington.
And Mr. Harris, of course, the biggest common issue for Seoul and Washington is dealing with nuclear North Korea. And, well, where do the People Power Party and the Biden administration stand on North Korea? Do you think we're going to see more coordination?
Well, I mean, I think there's a real question of just in terms of where North Korea is in terms of the Biden administration's priorities right now. I mean, I think you have, of course, activity as far as testing is concerned from the North Korean regime, but of course, the Biden administration has its hands full as far as Ukraine is concerned. And so, right now, I think as far as the Biden administration's approach, I mean, it's very much taking, it's not calling it strategic patience, but it very much looks like that, where it's not panicking over these tests. It's sort of accepting that it's there, making clear that the offer to talk is open, but not really offering real, substantive concessions that I think would change the negotiating environment, and that status quo seems likely to continue. So, I mean, I think having a new South Korean administration that is, prepared to take, I think, a harder line on North Korea won't necessarily be out of step with the Biden administration. The question is, what would happen if, for some reason, there was a diplomatic opening? Does coordination become more difficult at that point? But I don't think really right now the outlook suggests that we're going to see that anytime soon. And so things will likely, my guess would be that they'd be smooth.
And Professor RICHEY, South Korea and the United States are expected to strengthen their bilateral alliance under the Yoon administration. And the President-elect has mentioned placing additional anti-missile defense systems here in the country. Do you think North Korea's recent ICBM provocations will really, strengthen the case for this?
Not directly. North Korea's ICBMs aren't intended to target South Korea. They're an alliance wedge. They are a deterrent to the U.S. Becoming involved in and escalating conflict on the Korean Peninsula. They're there to weaken the U.S. role in providing South Korea extended nuclear deterrence by making the U.S. president, in the case of a conflict that goes totally sideways and gets out of control, choose between San Francisco and Busan. Indirectly, however, yes, I think they do support, at least for, the Republican Party and well, frankly, even also the Biden administration in Washington, as well as for the PPP here, the introduction of additional missile defense assets. North Korea's ICBMs indirectly shape the North Korea threat. And fit into the North Korea threat in terms of the U.S. ROC alliance, and these ICBMs, they heighten the security risk on the peninsula, and therefore justify missile defense assets here. We've already heard talk about an additional THAAD battery around Seoul for some protection for important places in Seoul. Additional Patriot missile batteries, you can imagine them coming on the peninsula, as well as the standard missiles that are part of the layered missile defense assets. Plus, of course, South Korea's own systems, such as potentially the imported Iron Dome system and indigenous systems for dealing with the North Korean artillery. All those indirectly, I think, are supported by North Korea's progressing ICBM program.
And Professor RICHEY, well, North Korea has certainly been the biggest headache for South Korea and the United States over the past decades. But in a recent Asan Institute survey conducted last year, it showed that fewer Koreans now believe the South Korea-US alliance should be solely based on North Korea issues than in previous years. How do you see the scope of their relations expanding?
So in the first place, we've seen in a foreign affairs article by the Yoon administration, at that point still candidate Yoon, and his team show interest in cooperation with the Quad through Quad Plus, as to say with the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. That could include primarily, I think, non-traditional security areas such as vaccines and climate change. As well as perhaps supply chain diversification. The larger U.S. free and open Indo-Pacific concept, I think we can expect greater involvement in updating what the Moon administration called the New Southern Policy on Southeast Asia. Whatever the Yoon administration will call it, I'm not sure. that will dovetail with the U.S. free and open-ended Pacific concept, and I think will probably be more assertive in doing that. We can expect cooperation in space, which is already ongoing. Civilian nuclear cooperation between the U.S. and South Korea may increase. The Moon administration was operating a nuclear phase-out policy for civilian nuclear reactors. The Yoon administration will reverse that, and that could open up some civilian nuclear cooperation for export of nuclear stations abroad, for instance. Pharma, biohealth, and bioscience, I think we'll expect human rights to be a bit more on the agenda, a bigger defense of the liberal model. And then, of course, Ukraine and Russia. I think the U.S. will expect and hope that South Korea will take more of a vocal role in decrying what's happening in Ukraine and putting increased pressure on Russia.
And Mr. Harris, the same question to you as well. How do you see the South Korea-US alliance evolving or expanding?
We heard, I think, a long, I think, wish list of what we've seen, and a lot of that, of course, was reflected in the joint statement of last year. I really want to stress, the importance of improving trilateral relationships with Japan as well as South Korea, and building those ties. And I think it's really an area where I think Washington is anxious and I think maybe hopeful about the kind of rhetoric that we've heard from President-elect Yoon during the campaign and more recently. And, I think it's certainly an encouraging sign that he's bringing Professor Park with him to Washington. But I really think, you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy they released several weeks ago, there was a list of action items, and very high on that list was improving trilateral cooperation and really trying to fix the Japan-South Korea relationship. And so I think you're going to have a lot of effort from the Biden administration on that question, and really trying to find a concrete way to get both of the allies thinking in a more future-oriented way, finding areas of common interest, finding areas to cooperate, whether it's hard security or whether it's development, public health, economics, whatever the issue area is. I think really trying to find concrete ways that Tokyo and Seoul can really start working together, I think is really going to be high on the list for the Biden administration.
And in addition to working on South Korea's relationship with Japan, it looks like Mr. Yoon will have to recalculate Korea's strategy towards China as well. And Professor RICHEY, how do you think the president-elect is going to handle the US-China rivalry? How far do you think he's going to go in order to support the US in its Indo-Pacific initiatives?
This is the $10,000 question, or more than likely the 10 or 20 or $100 billion question. To some degree, Yoon is a black box on foreign policy, even though his team, including obviously Park Jin, who's in Washington, also Kim Sung-han, who's on the transition committee, Kim Tae-hyo, those are all pretty well-known quantities. But Yoon himself, who will be making these decisions at the highest levels on the strategic interaction between South Korea and China, is a bit of an unknown quantity on foreign policy. And I think, frankly, his ability to push back on some of the more problematic aspects of China's behavior in the region, and with respect to South Korea in particular, will depend in part on events. As I said, I think the delegation from the incoming Yoon administration to Washington really represents a tilt towards D.C., and I think that that's an early message, a sort of diplomatic, very mild, but nonetheless a noticeable shot across the bow, or at least a signal in the direction of Beijing. But of course, Beijing isn't going to sit there and simply take it. At some point, they're going to react. It might be diplomatically, it might be economically, it might be through other means, perhaps in North Korea. And I think how the Yoon administration responds to China asserting what it considers to be its prerogatives in the region and with respect to the Korean Peninsula is going to be a very interesting question. And we don't really know the answer to that yet. So I think this will be one of the biggest things that we'll have to keep an eye on going forward.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Harris, well, President Biden announced the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework last October as Washington's signature economic policy for the Asia region. And there haven't been too many details yet, but what do we know so far, and where does South Korea stand in this?
Well, I think South Korea is certainly on a list of partners that the United States has approached and consulted with as far as the negotiating partners for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. But I think there's still a lot of work internally going on within the administration, lots of consultations with experts outside of the administration, and really trying to figure out what exactly a realizable, implementable, on a quick timetable. I mean, I think the administration really wants to move quickly on this. What the details of that actually look like, and so it very much is a work in progress. I think if, for example, U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai was testifying in both houses of Congress this past week. Very unclear. A lot of questions about what exactly they're going to do. They've taken market access off the table, which I think raises some big questions about how exactly they're going to entice some partners, particularly some of the more developing countries in the region, to join the framework and to join the negotiations. And so, no, frankly, at this point, we're still really waiting to see what exactly the administration wants to include in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and then what it's prepared to really offer its trading partners, including countries like Japan and South Korea, in terms of bringing this over the finish line. And I think digital is going to be a big priority, but beyond that, I think it's really hard to say what exactly is going to be in it.
Well, that was Tobias Harris, Senior Fellow at the Centre for American Progress, and Mason RICHEY, Professor of International Politics at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies in Seoul. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.